Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our planning meeting tonight. It is now 6:02 p.m. and I would like to start the meeting. My name is Mike Fletcher. I will be chairing the meeting tonight. I would like to remind everybody present that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for publication on the Council's website. There are no planned fire alarms this evening. In the case of an emergency, please evacuate the building using the nearest available exit, not the windows, and congregate at the assembly point outside the college. Okay. Right, item 1 on our agenda is apologies for absence. Carly, have we had any apologies?
Apologies from Councillor Chinook, and Councillor Heath is a substitute for her. Yep. And we've also had apologies from Councillor P. Arnold.
Yeah. Thank you. And everybody else is here and present. Thank you. So item 2 on the agenda is our minutes. I'd like to move that the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 27th of February 2025 be approved as a correct record. Does anybody have any comments on the accuracy of those minutes? Agreed? Lovely, thank you. Okay, item 3 on the agenda, items of urgent business. I have not agreed to any urgent business items this evening. Item 4, declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest to make regarding any of the items we're discussing tonight? Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. Item 12, I'm predetermined, so I will not be voting on that application and will be taking the seat back there as of the ward councillor and hoping to speak then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, excuse me. Councillor Lydiard, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. 24/01174 TBC and 24/01175 TBC. It's in my ward, been heavily involved with the building over the years. I'm also on the Tilbury Towns Fund board, but I haven't predetermined, and I wasn't actually involved in the decision to spend the money on that building anyway, so just thought I'd let you know.
Thanks, Steve. We okay? Yeah, thanks, Steve. I don't see that being an impediment, so thanks for letting me know. Brilliant. Any other declarations of interest? Great, thank you. Declarations of receipts. Has anybody had any letters, correspondence of any description regarding any of the items they'd like to declare? No. I've had an email from a lady by the name of Amanda Redmond regarding the Gunning Road item. I have explained to her that we do not predetermine, so therefore we can't take sides, but I have made a note of 1 or 2 of the points she raised, which I will ask as questions, just to get clarification, if that is okay with everybody. Item 6, planning appeals. You'll find this on pages 11 to 20, and may I ask Jonathan Keane to present this, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report's as set out, as noted. Any questions, but otherwise as noted.
Any questions from members? Councillor Sisterson, go ahead.
Thank you very much. No, I just noticed there's a couple of them that it was sort of dropped because it said the notice didn't specify dates and things. So I just wondered if there was any particular reason for that happening like twice in the... Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that was, those are unfortunate cases, those. We have been working with a legal team and we are looking at sort of reviewing the enforcement notices and templates we use, and we have got some new staff starting soon, so we will be refreshing all the enforcement processes as part of that work. So those 2 have been noted, and we sort of picked up from those what we would need to do and what the legal team would need to do. So yeah, we'll use those as sort of learning tools.
Ashley, would you like to comment?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So in terms of the timing, Councillor, the reason they came out in the same period is effectively those notices would have been served at the same point. So the practice that we applied was consistent. PINs have obviously determined those at the same period, so that's why it reads. Unfortunately, we've had two in that block, but in future, as long as we haven't got any others in the system that are being determined by PINs, our future practice will be updated.
Thanks, Ashley. Jonathan, I've got one question, just sort of a high-level question. Item 5.1, appeal performance. It does look like since October through to now, with the exception of January, there's been a quite sustained increase in the numbers of appeals, but there's still only the odd one at best getting allowed through. So have you any thoughts on that? You know, what does that tell us in terms of the kind of appeals that are coming through?
So the percentages are staying below 20 for all of the cases where there've been more than one appeal received. Previously, targets for appeals allowed has been 30%, so we're well under that. And this week we've had 4 dismissed appeals in a row. So the appeal performance is good, which is supporting the decisions made by officers and members on recent applications. So it's a positive figure, I think.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, that was the impression I got, certainly. Okay, so unless anybody has any further questions on appeals, we'll move on. All right, so that brings us to item 7 on the agenda, which is 24/01174/TBC Centenary House. I will try and get my dentures properly in for the rest of the evening. Can I ask Nadia Houghton to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm presenting these next 2 items, and they're very similar, so I'll go through them at pace if that's okay with members. They're quite straightforward proposals. So the application relates to Centenary House. They've been submitted by the Council on behalf of the Tilbury Towns Fund application, and it relates to Centenary House and principally changes to the ground floor community hub, predominantly internal modifications to the ground floor of the site, as well as some external changes to the facade of the building. So as you can see, apologies. I'm just making sure the screen is sharing okay. There. So the site is located at the eastern side of the Civic Square in Tilbury, as can be seen before you, and is outlined in red in front of you there. This is the existing ground floor. It's essentially one large room, really, with some WC facilities, and the improvements relate to some changes to the internal layout, so you have a variety of greater uses that will be available within the community hub, including a new kitchen, extractor fan coming off part of the building, and some new condenser units, and general changes and improvements to the exterior facade in relation to the roller shutter doors and some other ventilation on the ground floor. So this is the elevation as existing. There's a close-up image of the existing entrance, and as you can see, under the cover at the moment, under the canopy, it lacks the soffit required, really, and the improvements that are sorely needed to the front of the building. There's existing side elevation, and this is the proposed front elevation, and you can probably just make out there along the ground floor there are modest and very minor alterations to the ground floor to improve, say, the roller shutter doors and some ventilation and extraction equipment there. And this is a mock-up of the proposal with the improvement showing. And this is the side elevation of the building showing the condenser unit on the ground floor flank. And some images of the site. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the main building. It's quite prominent in the square. Side images of the building and its context. A close-up of the front of the building and the existing roller shutter doors. and some images showing the improvements that will be needed underneath the balconies and to the frontage generally. Overall, the proposal submitted by the Tilbury Towns Fund is supported. It raises no concerns at all, either in principle or in detail, and is recommended to members for approval. Happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks, Nadia. So, any questions from members? Councillor Lydiard?
Thanks, Chair. Just the extraction unit, it's just quite a small one, isn't it? So I know they had a flood around about the Christmas time, and prior to that it was used pretty frequently. So what they're doing now is completely renovating the 3,000 square feet of space, yeah? You're happy that it's not a massive, great thing that sort of blows out all sorts of odd smells?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Chair, it's a very modest extraction serving the modest kitchen facilities within the community hub, so it wouldn't be a concern for neighbours or residents above at all or nearby.
And I take it we're doing the two together at the present moment, are we? The non-illuminated sign. What size is that, and roughly where will it be? Will it be on the wall itself or in the street on poles?
Through you, Chair, I'll come on to the advertisement application after this item, purely because voting would need to happen on the item separately. But for the benefit of the question, the actual advert is on the ground floor front elevation. It's not illuminated at all, and I'll show that in the next presentation.
Thanks very much. It will be really welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Any other members? Any questions? Fantastic. Well, let's move on to debate, if there is going to be any. Would anybody like to comment, make any points around their view of this development? Steve.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just to say that it's going to be used by the community, 3,000 square feet of space, for all sorts of things, from getting people jobs to special needs space, and all sorts of clubs, and as I say, anything that we can use it for in the community. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne.
Yeah, looking at it's great. We can't. It's a no-brainer, isn't it? Money spent in the right place for a change. We don't often see that, do we? We often see it spent that we disagree with. So yeah, absolutely great news.
Thank you, Gary. So if there are... Steve, would you like to?
I'll propose, yeah.
So yes, if there are no more comments, we'll move to the proposal. So the recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions. Steve, I assume you'll be proposing that?
Yeah.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Green? And all those in favour? Okay. Thank you, folks. Right, I counted that all of us had put their hands up, so I didn't think there was going to be anybody against. Thank you. So I think we can move on to that. That recommendation has been approved, and we can move on to item 8. The glasses are working about as well as the dentures. By the way, please accept my apologies. I've got a slight tooth problem today, so I am talking a bit like I've got a mouthful of marbles. So apologies if I'm a little bit indistinct at times. Okay, so item 8, Nadia, can I ask you to present, and probably a lot better than I've just done.
Thank you, Chair, and we can hear you fine. This is an advert application relating to the same centenary house. Very modest proposal. I'll skip through those same slides you've already seen. It relates to a proposed non-illuminated sign to the immediate left of the front of the building, as detailed there, right in front of you. It's a very modest sign promoting the community use of the ground floor. Absolutely no issues with respect to its visual amenity impact or highway safety concerns at all, which are the key issues that we look at with regards to advert consent, and it's recommended to members for approval and that consent should be granted. Thanks.
Thanks, Nadia. Any questions? Steve, you've already asked one. Gary?
Is this just adverts for what's going on inside the building, or is it you're selling space?
Through you, Chair, it's to advertise exactly the Council and Tilbury Towns Fund promoted use of the site as it is detailed in front of you on the slide there, and nothing else. It wouldn't be an altering design, it's what's been submitted within the advert application.
Any further questions on that, Gary? Okay, so anybody wish to debate or comment, or shall we move to the recommendation? Okay, the recommendation again is to approve subject to conditions. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Green, thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Byrne, thank you. All those in favour? That's all of us again. Okay. Thank you very much. That recommendation has been approved. Okay, we move on now to item 9 on the agenda. This is 24/01277/4 Gunning Road. And I'd like to ask Jonathan Keane to present the report.
The presentation over, sorry. If you got it.
Just getting the visuals up, folks. Will only be a second. Alternatively, Jonathan, you can mime it.
Apologies, Chair, that was me. I still had control of the presentation.
Yeah.
My bad.
Control issues. Okay. Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you. Apologies for that. So the application before you tonight seeks permission for the construction of a 2-storey commercial building with an overall floor space of 70 square metres, and the proposed uses within the E-use class, and that allows for uses such as display and sale of retail goods other than hot food, provision of financial services, professional services and other appropriate services, so small-scale quiet uses that would be acceptable in a residential area. So the application site is on the screen in front of you at the moment. It lies to the east of the Globeworks estate on the boundary with the residential properties in the Newborough Road estate. So that's an aerial photo of the site. And that's another zoomed in site plan showing the land ownership. And that is a plan showing the floor space or the floor plans and elevations of the building. So the proposed building would front Towers Road with undercroft parking to the right-hand side as you look at it, and cycle parking to the east of the site, and vehicle and pedestrian access would be taken from Towers Road. This application, so this is the site in front of you, so it's where the vegetation is at the moment. So the application itself represents a resubmission of a scheme that was refused in 2022, and it was also dismissed by the Planning Inspectorate. The only reasons for the refusal of that scheme were the impact of the access point and the noise and disturbance that would be caused. So in the previous scheme, the access, you can see my cursor, would come through the residential parking court to the back of the site. So the new scheme, the access will be taken from Towers Road to the 2 parking spaces. The site is in a commercial area and the proposes a small-scale commercial use. Matters including layout, design and amenity have all been considered to be acceptable, and the report is therefore recommended for approval.
Thanks, Jonathan. We have a couple of speakers. We have Kieran Lilly, the agent, making a statement in support, and then we have Jodie Hudson, a resident, with a statement of objection. So, Kieran, if I might ask you to... So when you're ready, Kieran, if you press on the right button, your light will illuminate, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in relation to this item today. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and the agent for the application. The application before you is the culmination of discussions with officers and a process of refinement to arrive at a proposal that is now respectfully considered appropriate from a planning perspective in all respects. For instance, a previously proposed vehicular access taken from the residential parking court on Gunning Road is no longer included, with vehicles visiting the building now taking access from Towers Road. Planning policy seeks to ensure that proposed developments are compatible with the existing prevailing pattern of development in the locality. Accordingly, the development provides new employment floor space in a designated employment area. In terms of residential amenity, the building is proposed for uses that are generally considered acceptable in residential areas, and its modest scale and distance from the nearest residential properties are such that there will be no detrimental overlooking, overbearing or noise impacts arising. Indeed, the building has no windows capable of overlooking residential neighbours and will provide enhanced noise attenuation to any noisy neighbouring commercial uses than at present. The proposal will contribute to employment provision in Thurrock in a sustainable location. It will meld into the existing pattern of development in the locality, closely resembling the design of an existing building immediately opposite the application site. The proposal is also wholly technically sound, having regard to consultation responses received from statutory consultees, as confirmed in your officer's report. I therefore commend the proposal to you and respectfully request that you proceed to grant planning permission this evening in accordance with the officer's recommendation, subject to the schedule of conditions proposed by officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. If you'd like to go back to your seat, thank you very much. Jodie, if you would like to join us. So if you press the button on the right, the light should go on, and when I stop talking, you should be able to be heard, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It is with much disappointment that I'm again in the position of having to speak on behalf of the residents of Gunning Road to strongly oppose the planning application in Towers Road, Gunning Road. This application is barely any different to the previous application, which has already been refused by both Thurrock Council and the Planning Inspectorate, and there was also a second application, again refused by Thurrock Council and the Planning Inspectorate. Surely this unnecessary infill at the bottom of our garden in a quiet cul-de-sac location has been refused twice before because it's completely unsuitable. And this application is no different. Previously, planning members described the application as laughable, insulting and inappropriate. May I list the reasons for our objections? The proposal is to build this commercial property on what is a buffer zone. The strip of land is in the planning permission for the estate. Point number 19 reads, a buffer zone is to protect the future residents from the nuisances which might arise from the adjacent commercial activities, shall provide prior to the first occupation of any dwelling built pursuant to this permission in accordance with details which shall be previously submitted to and agreed by the local planning authority. To build on this land will not protect us from these nuisances. It will bring them straight into the lives of those living at this end of Gunning Road by putting an industrial unit just metres from the homes of the residents. Whilst conditions for working hours may be given, we know from experience living close by to the Globe estate that these are absolutely not adhered to, with occupants working very late into the evening and often into the early hours on a regular basis. Residents in nearby Crescent Avenue lost their buffer zone when site operators spread out and have regular complaints into the EA and the council regarding noise and intrusion from these businesses, and this will be no different. In recent years, there have been at least 3 major fires within the Globe estate. One caused homes to be evacuated whilst it was brought under control. Surely proposing another unit just metres away from our homes is putting residents in danger. The application states the unit is located a sufficient distance away from residential development and would not be overshadowing or overbearing. This unit will actually be exactly that, as well as intrusive, noisy, and will affect light into the homes and gardens, as well as put the residents in harm's way. The vehicle movement within the industrial estate mean HGVs have to mount the pavement immediately outside this proposal site to execute their right turn into Towers Road. This would be incredibly dangerous for anybody accessing the site. The HGVs also use the pavement to park and wait, and sometimes for 20 minutes or more to access the haulage yard opposite due to a small, busy entrance, limiting the number of vehicles. Losing this parking will add to more congestion and overcrowding in the local area. The report refers to nearby parking. This is usually occupied by those working on the estate or by those storing cars that are there or have been worked on. The previous report to this committee listed concerns about the volume of traffic movements, and there will be no difference in these movements within this application. The Right to Light Act 1958 is a legal protection that gives property owners the right to uninterrupted light through their windows, and if this light has been enjoyed for over 20 years, Gunning Road has been built for over 20 years, and this unit will most definitely have an adverse effect on those homes by substantially reducing the light received to the rear of the properties. Finally, personally, we cannot put across strongly enough the continued stress and worry this constant battle brings to preserve our quality of life. As we said at the start, it's an unnecessary infill, and how many times do we have to keep fighting against what seems to be the same application, just with small tweaks? This application is a blight on the residents of Gunning Road. We urge you again to object this proposal for the reasons you did before and for the reasons stated tonight and for the residents of Gunning Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodie. You may take your seat. Members, I'm going to open it up for questions to Jonathan, and obviously you may want to take into account what you've heard from the speakers, but we'll address all questions to the officer. So, Tom first, then I think it was Aaron, and then Jackie.
Thank you very much, Chair. Jonathan, would you be so kind as to show us the location plan? Thank you. So, obviously this is in the area that I represent. I know the area quite well. Obviously what you have is two historic sites there. So you have Gunning Road, then you have the industrial estate. It's quite a heavy industrial estate, and if you look at the blue line and the red lines, that's very heavily vegetated. So, as an example, you've got huge warehousing on the left-hand side. Those houses can't see any of that warehousing because of this historic buffer zone that's been there. I slightly disagree with this idea that red zone is in the industrial estate, because we've got a subjective view here as to who owns that land. I know effectively the applicant owns the land, but the giveaway for me is the actual application. It says land between Gunning Road and industrial estate. I would argue that's the buffer zone. If it was in the industrial estate, it would say industrial estate land. So for me, I'm slightly concerned as well that you've got a fence line running through the middle of a buffer zone. Why would you have a fence line running through the middle of the buffer zone if, as the resident says, they have historic deeds that suggest that part of that is on the original estate? So I think for me, this might be a subjective one. Members will have their own subjective views on this, but I would argue that is encroachment on a buffer zone.
Tom, sorry to disturb you, but can we just keep to questions for now?
Yeah.
We have some very good points to make, but we'll make them as part of the debate, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, yeah, the question would effectively be, this buffer zone is there to protect residents from what is deemed to be very heavy industrial use. Thank you.
Sorry, Tom, what is the question?
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. So the local plan designation runs up to the eastern side of that blue line. So the residential area is to the east of the blue line on the right-hand side, and the commercial area is to the left of the blue line on the right-hand side. So whilst I appreciate there is vegetation and planting along there, it does fall within the area of the core strategy, that allocates commercial uses.
And the resident, or one of the speakers state, sorry, Chair, can I ask one more and then?
Sure.
Sorry, Chair, last one. The resident's obviously stating here that the buffer zone was in the original strip of land for the estate. They've obviously got some historical records to back that up. So I can't see how the blue lines all of a sudden on the right-hand side is actually industrial land. Thank you.
Okay, so I haven't gone into depth with the original consent, but the local plan designation does show that the buffer zone lies within the commercial area, which it could well do. It doesn't mean that because of the land use designation, there isn't other activity on that site. So, yeah, you're probably right that it is within the commercial, or it is within the commercial area, but it could be a buffer zone. So it could be a buffer zone in a commercial area.
Thanks, Tom. I think, Erin, you're next, and then Jackie and Gary.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is basically the same as Councillor Kelly's. In the original application for the estate, the resident said number 19 reads, and I won't read it. Is that true? And was that in the application?
So the original consent, there was a buffer zone between the two areas, but even if, so that condition was at the point in time when the estate was built, just because the condition is there doesn't mean some future development couldn't take place, and that's what's being proposed and is before you tonight.
You wish to ask a follow-up, Erin?
Yes, please. So we're on the provision that it could have been in the original application, but we can't actually enforce that now.
If this planning permission has been made, and you could approve a planning permission where it removes some of that land that was in the buffer zone for commercial development, so you could approve this, yes.
Yeah, sorry. It's been suggested I bring in legal, so a quick diversion to legal.
Just to pick up the question about the interrelationship between the existing condition and this permission, as is always the case with a grant of a new permission, you could, in essence, override what was the old condition. You may want to have regard to what that old condition was achieving, but you're also obliged by the 2004 Act to take into account what the relevant development plan says. And obviously, you've got that designation, which has been described by the officer. So there is that sort of, there's various things you can consider, but the development plan is there and you're obliged to consider it.
Erin, yeah, we're still with you, so yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So if we wanted to go with we didn't want to change the original permission, are we in our right to do that?
It wouldn't be a matter, what you're currently considering is this application, so you can consider the planning merits and effects of this application, which may include the interrelationship with the existing state of the land, which will include the buffer zone that you're describing. So, I mean, you could, but it would be on the basis that the planning harms of this proposal are too high, rather than you don't want to change the old application. It comes to the same thing, but that's the way that it would be formulated.
Thanks, guys. So I think it's Jackie next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Jodie mentioned that the proposal site where the HGVs are going to turn means they've got to mount the pavement to do so. What's your view on that? Can they safely turn, or do they have to mount the pavement? Is my question.
Just briefly, and then I'll let Julian in. So the HGVs would be accessing the site, or are accessing the site opposite this. So there wouldn't be any HGVs accessing this site, but I'll pass on to Julian for the technical highway stuff.
Yeah, this is it's a bit difficult because obviously what's been made aware to us is obviously, I guess, tracking out of a development opposite. We wouldn't necessarily have known about that or take that into account. What we're looking at is accessibility to the existing or the proposed development in terms of obviously getting two cars off the highway onto the development. It's difficult for me to comment to say that. I mean, yeah, HGVs do have large swept paths. If they do, it's something we're not aware of.
Sorry, before I move on, just to check on something, Jonathan, you said you don't expect any HGVs to be accessing this site. Is that what you?
Yeah, this site's a very small scale site, so there wouldn't be any HGVs accessing it. There is a yard opposite, which is where the HGVs do enter and exit.
Thanks, Jonathan. Right, I'm trying to keep me order. So, Jackie, did you have any more questions on it? Right, so Gary, I have you next.
Well, it's kind of, that's the same question, I was at HGVs, but now we know that there is a problem. Does this change things? I mean, if we're going to go up grass verges and make it dangerous and something we didn't know about, should we know about it, and should that make a difference?
So HGVs, if they are turning across the front of the site at the moment, they could potentially be overrunning the pavement. So the situation wouldn't necessarily be any different if the building was there. It was just if a vehicle was accessing or exiting that site, they would have to wait for the HGV to access the site opposite. So it's not that there's going to be a harm arising from the building, just the users of that building with their smaller vehicles would just need to be aware of the HGV's manoeuvring, which would be the same for any premises along there.
Yeah, Gary.
The picture that you showed us design, it just looks like a house with a garage. Is it meant to look like a house?
Yeah,
Is this like, could this be a plan to actually one day turn it into a house?
No, the appearance, it does look more domestic in nature than the bigger sort of sheds on the industrial site. But I think that's probably the applicant's done that because it's sort of steps down between the industrial site and the neighbours, the residential properties to the east. So there was an application so the first application in 2022 was for commercial building of the similar nature with a different access point. When this was refused and dismissed at appeal, an application came in for residential property, which we recommended for refusal, and the planning inspectorate dismissed. So because the allocation of the site is for commercial purposes, the scheme has come back as a new commercial scheme with the access off Towers Road, which addresses the previous concerns from the planning inspectorate about the access through the residential area. So the scheme's been designed, as I said, I think, as a step down between the bigger commercial buildings to the west or the left and the residential buildings to the east or the right.
Yeah, sure, Gary. Keep going until it makes sense. I mean, this is important.
But could they turn that into, they wanted residential, didn't get business. I mean, could this be just tomorrow, we're not a business, we're going to put it into a 3-bedroom house? Could that happen? And would that be appropriate? Would that be legal? What would happen? Could it happen?
They would need planning permission if they wanted to change it into a residential property.
Thanks, Gary. So hang on. Right. Linda, I've got 2 Steves, then I can fit you in after that. Apologies, it's a queue of Steves, but you wait ages for 1 and 2 come together. Steve Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we normally do. Life's like that. Just having looked at the site and the plan you put up, which shows that buffer zone carrying on, I'm not sure how much further north it goes, but it clearly does go further north. I am very familiar with the business on the left of it, simply because I've been using them for years. And so the comment that was made about the HGVs turning into the yard opposite is very true. Nobody puts anything near there because they know that it's the only way they can get 40-foot containers into that site. And that's going on constantly all day. And I just know that because I've been there so many times and therefore witnessed it. But what's confusing me is the statement you made that said the blue lines are a buffer zone, and they were put in place when I'm not sure, I'm assuming they were put in place when the industrial estate was first built or when the housing was first built? Question mark.
Yeah, so the application for the housing was from the late 1990s, so 1998 for 104 residential properties. And as I said, I haven't looked at the full site plans for all that, but I believe that the buffer zone was part of that residential application.
Okay, so that was put there to make sure that the builder didn't go into what was designated as the industrial site, and the industrial site presumably gave up that piece of land as a compromise to enable that buffer zone to exist for the reasons that are blindingly obvious, I assume. So does that make sense?
As I said, I haven't looked through all the details of that application, but I would imagine that was why the case, but I can't confirm for sure.
Okay, so that's a reasonable conclusion. So how does it change? In other words, it's in my head, from what I've heard, it was worthless on day one. Yes, no, I'm not. From what Daniel was saying, you can override this at any time, in which case it was a pointless exercise. No?
It wouldn't have been, at the time when the estate was built, it was considering the impact of the whole of the Globe Works and Tower Works on all the new properties. This application is for a very small section of it to the southern part, so this would only give permission for that very small red area. So any further development in the rest of the blue area would always need planning permission, and each case would be considered on its merits. So this site is a very small site, has access direct to Towers Road, and is adjacent to the parking court, which is why it was considered on balance that the recommendation of approval to put a building there was considered to be acceptable, and there wouldn't be significant harm or change to nearby residents.
Thanks, Jonathan. I guess the expression that comes into my head is a thin end of a wedge, but thank you. You answered what was confusing me, if nothing else. So thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Steve L.
Thanks, Chair. So this site was never defined as an amenity area or a buffer zone as such, was it?
It's got no formal use.
Nothing formal.
From my understanding, it was a buffer zone which was designed to sit between the two land uses, but there was no formal use of it. And as you've probably seen from the aerial photos, it's vegetated largely. But yeah.
Thanks. And the reason the appeal was dismissed last time was because there was some other parking arrangements, yeah? So was that the only reason it was dismissed?
Yes, so the first application, Carly, can I have the screen back? So the first commercial application, where's my pointer gone? Oh, wrong screen. There we go. So the first commercial application, same red line area, and the access was to be taken through here. So this is, as you can see on the screen, Gunning Road. This is a sort of open square in front of the properties, and this is a private parking court for a number of the properties. So the proposed access for that one came through here, so vehicles travelling to the building would have gone through the open square and through the private parking area and would have parked at the back of the property, whereas the new application proposes the access solely from Towers Road within the commercial area. And there were two reasons for refusal for the 2022 scheme. So it was essentially the same building, but the two reasons were the inappropriate access through the parking court, and the second reason was noise and disturbance caused by vehicles travelling through the parking court to nearby residents. There was no objection from committee at the time in terms of the principle, the design, the layout, the appearance, or the impact on neighbours of the building itself. The only two reasons for refusal were the inappropriate access through the residential parking court and the noise caused by vehicles moving through that parking court.
If I may, Chair. So if it went to appeal again, the likelihood that it would go through?
I think it would be difficult reason for refusal, this one, because fundamentally the building's the same, the use is fundamentally the same, and we have worked, or the applicant has worked, to remove the harm for inappropriate access through the residential parking area.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. Kathy, Linda, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just concerned about parking. Jodie mentioned that there was concerns with traffic, and obviously people have mentioned the HGVs. There's two car parking spaces within the proposal and then bike spaces. What about, has that been looked into, other parking? Because I'm assuming chances are there's going to be more than 2 employees using more than 2 cars, and then there are possibly people accessing or using the business. Has parking been looked into?
Yeah, we've looked at it from a highways point of view, and we're happy. The difficulty is, you know, with most things which we've talked about parking in previously, it has to be severe. If we don't consider that the parking is severe enough to refuse, then unfortunately we can't. And the 2 spaces they provided with cycle parking is sufficient in this case for this application.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you had the overhead picture of, could I have a look at that again, please? So to the sort of west of the application, there's obviously an access road into the Globe estate. So how far does that go up all along the buffer strip?
No, so where you can see on the screen at the moment, so there is an access to the works there, and then the next road in Globe Works is further to the west. I will just see if there's a better...
Yeah, that's better.
Oh yeah, there we go. So this is an access road to these units, and then there's main sort of tarmac metal roads to the rest of the estate there. So the buildings here take access from the public highway. So this bit is only a small access to the back of those units.
I think what I'm sort of getting at really is if, as Steve Taylor was saying, if it was the thin end of the wedge, there would actually, in theory, be room maybe for further access if there was applications for other units going along up that buffer zone.
Yeah. So potentially anything that's sort of where my cursor is, anything up there which was in the blue line, that would need planning permission if they wanted to put further commercial development on there. I think with those, it is closer to the back of properties, whereas with this scheme, the building is approximately where I'm circling on the plan, whereas if you put buildings there, they would be closer to the back of the residential properties.
Do you wish to follow up, Kathy? Or? Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Jonathan. I think the question I'd like to put is probably a little bit wide, but do bear with me. You've heard the concerns that Jodie voiced, and I've had a couple of residents have said the same thing, largely around noise pollution, around extended working hours beyond what's probably allowed. How can we address her concerns if this building does go up? How can we address those very real concerns that residents have got around the noise pollution, around the closeness to rather large amounts of heavy traffic, and around the extended working hours?
Okay, so in terms of this application itself, it's a fairly small unit. It's 70 square metres, and the uses proposed are within Class E, which are the quieter commercial uses, so things that could more often sort of exist in a residential area, so a small-scale retail premises, small-scale financial services, so things like sort of if you went to sort of financial advisor, that type of thing. So the uses for this building are small-scale and quiet uses. There is a construction management plan as condition 4, so if permission is granted during the building process, we would require details of how it will be built to make sure it's carefully built. Condition 7 restricts the use to those Class E uses. So if they wanted to change the use, they'd have to make a new application. Condition 9 relates to hours of operation, which are 8 till 7 on weekdays, and 9 till 1 on 9 till 1 on Saturdays, and no time on Sundays and bank holidays. So it's a limited hours of use. And condition 10 is an obscure glazing condition to put obscure glazing in the first floor window that faces towards the residential area. So we've covered the uses and the hours on those conditions. I know there are wider questions on the Globeworks estate as a whole, and where new applications come forward, we do seek to limit the hours of use, the types of use that can take place, outdoor working, those type of things. But it is accepted there are a number of units on there that have predated planning conditions, so there are some that don't have those time limit conditions that we would apply today.
I'm going to expose my ignorance here. Type E. Tell me more, what kind of use are we talking about?
Yeah. So type E, it's in the description, of the application. So it's display or retail sale of goods other than hot food, so it can't be a takeaway, or provision of financial services or professional services other than health or medical care, and other appropriate services for that type of location. So it's small scale quiet uses. So it's, very small scale quiet uses.
But uses that require customers to turn up and park.
Yeah, they would usually have visiting members of the public, yeah.
Thank you. Certainly, Ash, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So just to come in on response to the question. So as Chair's articulated, how can committee satisfy itself that the issues being raised enable a permission to be granted? So that's what we have to consider. So John's articulated the conditions that we've inserted or recommended for members to consider. Those conditions have been developed off the back of consultation with services. So we've engaged with environmental health, for example, obviously Julian from Highways. That doesn't mean we couldn't add other conditions, but what I'd ask members to do is just to consider the test of sort of reasonableness. So if you do want to add other conditions, they do need to be proportionate, reasonable, enforceable. We do also have the opportunity for informatives. So if you're still not satisfied and we don't consider that we can actually insert an additional condition, then there is the option for informative. And when you sort of come into that point, I'd ask that if you do want to do that, we run that through John and myself before you kind of make any decisions on anything additional on those.
Thanks, Ash. Okay, unless further question? Yeah, Tom, have a go.
Thank you. It was just really to raise a few points. It's been mentioned that obviously this has been an appeal and certain things weren't raised last time, but it was rejected under a different committee. This is a new committee, so people might have different views and opinions on amenity space, etc. Second of all, I do still think there are some concerns with parking. Now, whilst we know through previous that imperial inspectors do take parking seriously, and whilst they've moved the parking issue from one side of the fence to the other, to me, I know Towers Road very well, parking is a problem in that area. The previous application had 3 spaces, this one has 2. And if you look on page 53, it does say, as a reason set out on the previous application, there was concern that would lead to parking or inconsiderate and harmful on-street pavement parking on Towers Road. So even though the parking was on the other side of the fence, it was acknowledged at the last application that there was concern over parking. So I appreciate the question. I appreciate that we're saying the parking's not going to be severe, but in a location where parking's already bad, it doesn't take a lot of cars to cause more problems. So that's, for me, is we recognise Towers Road as an issue in the last application. It doesn't seem to be raised now. So it was just grabbing your opinion on that. Thank you.
John.
Yeah, just one comment on that, and then I'll let Julian come back. So the concern about the previous application, it was reflected in the fact that it was the failure to provide suitably accessible parking. So the concern was that because it was coming through the parking court, it'd be unlikely to be parking that people would want to use. So you'd probably get more people wanting to park on the highway, whereas this one provides 2 spaces off the road that are easily accessible from Towers Road. So there's a slight difference in that sense. But I'll pass on to Julian as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, Jonathan's partly summed it up, but I mean, part of the other issue was obviously because you've got access from Gunning Road, the likelihood that the potentially there would be parking in Gunning Road as well, which would have been unacceptable. As I said, we have to prove that parking is severe. If we're saying that we're 1 parking space less than the parking standards, I think we would find it difficult to refuse an application, particularly when they're providing other facilities such as cycling. I think it would be very difficult for us to refuse an application because they were providing 2 parking spaces and not 3. We've had a lot of these cases before, and you're aware from like residential developments and whatever it is, where we have to look at it in the round and on balance. And on balance, we don't consider from a parking point of view there's severe reasons for refusal.
Thanks, Julian. I think we've probably started to get into the debate stage, and I think it's important that we do give you the opportunity to debate this, because there are clearly a lot of concerns, a lot of, I think, strong views. So let's get them out. Who'd like to start? Councillor Green, followed by Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. What I've heard this evening, I'm not satisfied we can put this application through, mainly round the buffer zone. The original buffer zone, I don't feel, by putting it there, it will be a massive impact on residents of Gunning Road. So as it currently stands, I will have to vote against this.
Thanks, Aaron. Gary?
Similar lines, Chair. Well, I don't know the area, obviously, but Tom's questions, Jodie's argument, HGVs, and it basically being on the wrong side of the road, I will be voting against this.
Jackie?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, as Aaron and Gary said, I've got concerns around the parking. I know, I appreciate that Jonathan said it's a small scale construction, but I can envisage a medium scale stroke big scale disruption for the residents. So I will be voting against it.
Kathy?
Yeah, I think my concerns is this thin end of the wedge argument. And if you've got a nice buffer zone, if you're living in a house and you've got a garden, and at the end of your garden, even though it's, just vegetation, it's nice to have that there, and you're screened from the whole industrial site. And I think if you start building into that buffer zone, there's not really any protection against that going on. So I think that's my main reason. And I think I'd just say, I understand the reason for it being rejected before and about the access, but the fact is, I wasn't obviously on the committee then, but the conversation may not have got beyond that. So there may have been further objections that were never got onto because that was insurmountable, that access road. So I think that's what I'd say.
Thanks, Kathy. Linda?
Yeah, I think my concerns are again with the buffer zone. If we agree this, then when's it going to stop? Because there'll be another one and another one and another one. And, I have been around the area, and when the buildings are so close to the houses, you're in your back garden and all you see is a big warehouse. And also the dangers with the parking, because you're going to have additional cars on the road with the HGVs and everything, and it is a very busy area.
Thanks, Linda. Steve?
I think had it not gone to appeal, I would be not supporting it, but it's been to appeal, and the only issue was the car parking. Therefore, I must support it.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Jackie?
Thanks, Chair. Respectfully, Steve, we're constantly told we must look at the application in front of us. We mustn't look at what could be, what should be, what might be, what may be. We have to look at what's in front of us. So I'm not looking ahead to an appeal. I'm looking at what's in front of me now.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, Ash?
Obviously, it's up to committee to come to its own decision, but it is important that you take into account any case law. So an appeal is case law, so you do need to consider that as part of your decision making.
Okay, folks, if I can try and summarise, I think there's two things. I think some of the issues that we've been discussing are issues to do with the Globe Industrial Estate as a whole, not necessarily this one development, and arguably putting an extra, not a warehouse, but from the sound of it, a sort of a light commercial, light is probably the wrong word, but a commercial, I thought it was a warehouse. I don't know where I got that idea from, but some of the issues that we have been talking about won't be addressed, won't be made any worse or any better by putting this down. That's one of the things I want to just put out there. However, when it comes to this particular development, 2 points that we keep coming back to. One is the idea of the buffer zone. Yes, I appreciate that a buffer zone can be, the decision can be made to ignore that, but I don't think you can ignore the reason why there was a buffer zone in the first place. Now, I do appreciate that the applicant has been told they need to deal with the problem of noise pollution. And if I understand it, Jonathan, they have, to your mind, they've addressed that the design of the building would mean that there's a good deal less noise than some of the other properties on Globe Estate. So you could argue that the reason for the buffer zone becomes less if you've got a building that is, for want of a better word, quieter. However, there was a buffer zone, there will not be a buffer zone, and as the point has been made that once a bit of it goes, chances are that you'll see the rest of it go in chunks. It's just life. So I think we do have concerns around the buffer zone. I also feel that from everything I've heard, the other issue, the other reason why we refused it before around parking and a harmful effect, I haven't been convinced that has been addressed. And I mean, it's not just a case of 3 versus 2, well, it's nearly 3. As I say, I thought we were talking about a warehouse. Once I realized that we're talking about a retail or commercial premises, then the thought comes into my mind, well, okay, you've got a couple of people who work there. Who will drive? It's nice to have cycle paths there, but people drive. And then you've got whoever is visiting the business will need to drive. So you're really limiting your options with 2 parking spaces to cover both those working in the building and those visiting it as customers. Which means that some of the issues that you identified in the previous application, in refusing the previous application, haven't really gone away. So for my money, on the grounds that we haven't, I don't feel that we have actually addressed both the concerns in the previous application, I am minded to refuse this application. I'm not saying there isn't a solution here, but the solution that's been proposed here doesn't, to my mind, address the parking issue. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. Just it's sort of spinning in my head. If that building, and I appreciate it's a commercial building, so probably accountants or bookkeepers or something similar of that kind of an industry. So assuming that there are 2 people and they drive there, if it was a residential property, what would be the minimum parking requirement for a building that size, Julian? Just assuming it was. I know it isn't, but assuming it was.
So it depends on the number of bedrooms, Steve. So if it was a 2 to 3 bedroom house, and depending on the accessibility. So there are buses and whatever it is that go along Dock Road, so it's probably close to the medium accessibility area. If we said it was low accessibility, then it's two spaces. If it's a 4 or 5 bedroom house, normally we ask for a further space, but it's not a requirement for a 4 or 5 bedroom house. If it were a number of houses together, then we would obviously ask for visitor parking. Now, the current standard is half a space per property. So if there were 4 or 5, then obviously you'd be asking for 2 or 3 visitor parking spaces. But ultimately, you look at it on, we've got to look at it on balance, and will every place have a visitor always at the same time? So for 4 or 5 houses, we may sort of say, well, actually, maybe 1 or 2 visitor parking spaces rather than 3 is enough. So it's the same that we've looked in this principle, you know, it's 2 plus half a visitor parking space, so that equates to 1. But, you know, as we haven't got a visitor parking space, but I understand there is, you know, parking in the road. There are, you know, there are parking bays in the road. So we have to take that all in the round. And as I said, on balance, there's not enough for us to refuse it out and out on just on parking. That would be a very difficult refusal. We'd have to, you know, you'd have to add other things like road safety and all that type of thing. And as I said, on balance, we looked at it and said, well, on merits, it wouldn't be severe enough to refuse it on parking.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. As I say, knowing the site adjacent to it, those parking spaces are full up by 7 o'clock in the morning. The only way I ever park there is to drive into the business that I'm dealing with. So I can kind of see that why that's potentially an issue, whether it's a, you know, one small business or 2 small businesses, or however they utilise the building. But I guess it's my old record, which is I don't care what the standards are. The reality is, if we all know when we drive around and you look, clearly parking's an issue everywhere, and all the time we stick to the sort of the minimum standard. That's what builders build to, and they never seem to account for all the vans that people take home these days. So the problem just becomes compounded. And I know you and I have had this discussion before. So, but thank you for the answer. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Chair.
Kathy, I think you wanted to add something.
It was actually more of a question, really. But what's not clear, why was...
Right, if I can just ask, I don't want to get back into the questions thing, but I'll allow this one, and then I think we need to move on to the vote.
All right, it could be part of the discussion, maybe. It was the application to build a house, a dwelling house there was turned down as well. Were the reasons for that parking or other reasons?
No, I will just find those for you.
That's a fair question, to be fair.
So the first reason was because the site is allocated for secondary commercial purposes, so we wouldn't want to build a residential property in a commercial area. And the second reason, they hadn't made a contribution towards the Essex RAMs, so that's sort of second minor reason, but the main reason was the in-principle objection to building in a commercial area.
Okay, folks, I think we are probably ready to move on to the vote. So the recommendation is to approve this development subject to conditions. We have to address that recommendation first. So do I have a proposer for that? Steve. Do I have a seconder? And may I ask all those in favour of the recommendation as read? Those against? Okay, so the recommendation falls. At this point, I'd like to ask Ashley to comment, because as I think you're by now aware, if we decide to go against the recommendation, we need to have good reasons for it, and Ashley's going to give us some thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the debate then, so from what I've heard, there's effectively three primary concerns that members have. So one is a conflict with this buffer zone. So as part of that, we've got an application which had a condition on it, but we've since had a local plan which is designated as the land as sort of employment. But the concern of members is conflict with buffer zone. There's also a concern around HGVs in terms of overrunning the pavement, and then a concern around parking impact. And members didn't use the word severe, but my colleague Julian identified that we need to define that as severe, so that members will need to sort of consider that. But there were effectively the three primary concerns that I sort of heard as part of the debate. So if it's okay, Chair, obviously in line with the Constitution, members will have to obviously put an alternative motion forward, and that needs to be considered. Our job is then to consider whether that is sort of reasonable, defendable. If we don't, then the normal practice in line with the Constitution is to defer with a minded to refuse, but we'll update the report. So on that basis, Chair, I'd like to bring my legal colleague in to go through those three reasons as to whether he considers those to be sort of reasonable and defendable.
Thank you. So with those three reasons, the first one relates to the historic planning permission and the condition provided therein. As has just been explained, that's a predecessor to your relatively new, I think it is a core strategy event rather than local plan. But in any event, the map attached to that designates this as a secondary employment zone, a secondary industrial and commercial area. And that runs up to the eastern side of the fence line. You obviously have a statutory duty under the 2004 Act to take into account your development plan. And in circumstances where your development plan succeeds the planning permission from the 1990s, that obviously poses a significant issue that the committee will need to engage with, and it seems to me it would be sensible for your officers to advise you further on that if you are minded to refuse. An inspector ultimately, and anyone making a decision under the 2004 Act, must have regard to the core strategy, and ultimately, if an objection was taken to the designation of that buffer zone, that objection could have been taken at the core strategy stage. That is how a core strategy works. It has been passed. It has statutory effect. In relation to the other two points, which amounts to similar highways concerns, you'll be aware of what NPPF says, the National Planning Policy Framework. The test is severe. That is a high test. And Julian has gone through what might and might not be seen to meet that standard. Severe is the top end of the scale. So what you are saying is not merely there is a highways concern, but it is essentially at the top of the range of options. And it may be that, again, officers can give you advice in relation to that if you are minded to refuse. The final point was about HGVs. There is an issue there about how that relates to this development rather than there being an existing problem in this area. If it is an existing problem, that isn't a problem with this planning permission, it is a problem with the area, and it may be useful for officers to advise you on what the situation is there. It may also be useful for them to advise whether, I know there's this strip point and the access, whether that, I know there's a road to the left of it. I don't know if that was designated to highway dedicated to highway. If it's not, that may limit any opportunity for further development up the buffer as well. So they may want to advise you in relation to that. As you may be able to get from where I'm going, I think currently it would assist you to have that advice. And then a final point about previous decisions of inspectors. You do have a previous decision. Obviously, it was refused on specific grounds. an inspector may take into account, and you may wish to take into account, why the previous planning committee didn't raise these concerns. I do take the point regarding, well, they may have got to the highways issue and that's it, and that may be the conclusion you come to, fair enough, but you may want to receive advice on that also. Inspectors, in my experience, not that this necessarily means that you need to take this into account, may see this as moving the goalposts. You may think it's a justifiable move in planning terms, but you may want to be advised on that as well. I hope that's of assistance, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. I think, just to make a point, I think one reason why a previous planning committee didn't raise the question about parking as we have is because they already had a problem with the parking of the commercial area. So, you know, it wasn't raised because it wasn't there. I think probably what we are looking to do as a committee is to find some way, ideally, in which we can not get in the way of commercial development, but address the concerns that residents have, some of which I agree sound like they're concerns with the existing Globe estate and may need to be addressed in a different way, possibly via enforcement. Okay, we've got a couple of people wanting to speak, so I think, Tom, you had your hand up first, then Gary, then Steve.
Yeah, I find with these, sometimes it's best just to keep it nice and simple. And ultimately, with material planning considerations, they are subjective. I listened to what you said. I think, for me personally, there are two material considerations that we could take forward. Maybe officers want to take them away and come back. That's probably, I think, probably better for to go away and come back. And I think that the two that stand out to me are the effect of the proposal on the nearby residential amenity. The reason I raise that is because of this buffer zone. Now, I know we're saying that legally the buffer zone no longer exists, but the principle of why the buffer zone was in there in the first place was to protect the residents. That suggests to me that whilst it's no longer relevant, the reality is we are now putting a commercial development closer to a home. So for me, that is overbearing. So that's material. So you gentlemen could go away with that and maybe come back. And the second one is on the basis that the previous inspector has taken parking incredibly seriously. There are comments in here on the previous one about the harmful pavement parking on Towers Road, which we know is already in a bad way. So again, material, and I'd like potentially for that to be taken away and come back. For me, I think they're the two material. Keep it simple. Let's not overcomplicate things. See what officers say. It's subjective. I think that'll keep it nice and clean. Cheers.
Thanks, Tom. So in effect, yeah, we're not arguing against the buffer or the parking in this particular place. We're arguing against the principle. What did the buffer achieve? And if you remove the buffer, how does that not create harm? And in terms of the parking, just by bringing it the right side of the fence, certainly doesn't seem to have addressed the concern that was in the original one. I just want to check, Ash, and sorry, did you get those points that Tom made?
Sorry, Chair. So I missed the second point, Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, it was the first was the effect on the proposal on nearby residential amenities, and obviously I'll back that up with the principle of the buffer, not the actual legal respect to the buffer. And then the second was still parking provision on the basis of the previous appeals and comments made on Towers Road and the impact in an already tough area, which I'm sure the officers can take away and come back to us with. Thank you. So they're the two I've come up with.
Thanks, Tom. I think we've got that noted now, yeah? So, well said. Who did I say was next? Gary?
Yeah, Ashley, you mentioned the local plan, and I don't think we had one. So can you explain how that comes into play when we haven't got a local plan?
Yeah, Councillor, so you've got the core strategy, it's the 2015 core strategy, so that was what I was referring to. But yeah, we don't have the local plan, slip of the tongue. Yeah.
Just for clarification, John?
Sorry, I would have meant core strategy then, apologies.
And Steve? No, which Steve was it? Steve T.
Thanks, Chair. Daniel, you mentioned something that happened in 2004, and I was trying Yes, do you remember when you...
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was
I didn't
referring
mean to wake you up. What was it that happened in 2004?
What I was referring to was the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. So Section 38 gives the powers for local authorities to have development plans, and Section 38(6) says that you must take into account that development plan when making decisions. So it's just the route through the requirements to... in fact, I've got the wording here if it helps. If regard is to be had to the development plan for the purposes of any determination to be made under the Planning Acts, the determination must be made in accordance with the plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Obviously, there are material considerations here that can be taken into account and can weigh against it. I think that's quite correct. It's just, I was just flagging the point that at least prima facie, your core strategy designates this for industrial uses.
Thanks, Daniel. So my point is that if a blanket decision was made all over Thurrock without anybody actually bothering to look to see that something was actually put there to protect something, and this almost reminds me of when they talk about acts of parliament that are totally inappropriate these days because they were made 400 or 500 years ago. But as somebody once said, if you wipe it out, there'll be somebody somewhere in the country that could then be exposed to a risk. So it strikes me that what was done in 2004, clearly nobody took into account the fact why that was there, and therefore, although you might say it overrides it, in reality, I'm glad you just clarified that you can then challenge it, because I think that's exactly what Tom was talking about, and that's what makes sense to me. If it was put there for a reason, you can't just ignore it. That's wrong.
And I think that's right. So, I mean, Councillor Kelly has set out material planning considerations that may be a reason for saying, notwithstanding what your core strategy says, this shouldn't be permitted. But because in that circumstance you're going against what the core strategy would indicate, obviously that will need greater weight than you would have in a situation where there was no plan telling you this. So I'm not saying you have to follow it, just merely that it's a consideration that the committee needs to weigh.
Thanks, Daniel. That was the point I was trying to make. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Steve. I know there's a couple of you want to speak. Just this may possibly address your concerns. Just been speaking to Ash, and we are thinking that we may want to suggest a motion to defer, minded to refuse, based on Tom's 2 material points, and pending an updated report from officers to address those concerns. So now, do you still wish to come in, Aaron, Kathy? Do you still wish to make a point? Yes, Kathy? Okay, thanks, Aaron.
Well, it's kind of related, and it would tie in with deferring it. Really, is that yes, we're being told that on the whatever it is, not local plan, yeah.
Yes. The thing,
yeah, the boundary. I'd like to be very clear about where the boundary is, because we're being told it's right up to the houses, but there's a line on this map that goes up the middle of that. So, you know, it's all very well just to take your word that that's where the boundary is, but it would be good to see, in black and white, a proper map of the boundary.
I think we can pick that up in the updated report.
Sorry, Mike, yeah, just picking up on what Kathy said there, that is an important point, because if we've got a red line from previous applications, that's important, and I would like to distinguish the application land between Gunning Road and industrial estate. We need to work out where that terminology come from. I suspect it's this red line. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Well, based on that discussion, Ash, you said you'd give us a form of words that we can actually work from.
Okay, so it's Councillor, in line with the Constitution, Councillor Kelly will have to propose the motion, so it's effectively the same process that we had previously, but this is an alternative motion. But effectively, what we're looking at here is a minded to refuse, but a deferral. And the minded to refusal reasons, what you articulated earlier, Councillor Kelly, so it's the effect on the of the proposal on the residential amenity, and then the parking provision and its related impact on Tower Road. So there are the reasons. So if that's correct, Councillor, effectively you'll need to propose that, and then you'll follow the same voting process.
You happy to propose that, Tom? So
I'll second.
Proposed by Tom, seconded by Aaron. All those in favour? Okay. So to be clear, we're minded to refuse, but we've deferred the final decision in order to give officers the opportunity to update the report to address the material concerns that we have. And any future decision will be based on whether they're able to do that. Good. Thank you, folks. That was very well done. Do you want to take a quick break before we move on to the next item? Really? God, you made a strong stuff. Okay. Right. Well, if you're happy to continue, we'll move on to the next couple of items then. If anybody starts weakening, just sort of, catch my attention. Right. So the next item on the agenda is item 10, which is Ashley Close. Now, we have a speaker. We have John Cecil, ward member. Oh, sorry, no, apologies, John. I have completely lost the plot. What we have to do is I have to get an officer to present the application first, and then we ask you to comment on it. So I'm really sorry, mate. I've had a long day. Yeah, John, if you want to sit here and so you'll be ready. Yes, just on that first one. That seems to be people's preferred spot. So, and apologies to you as well, Jonathan. Oh, it's all right. We should be able to. I think we're thinking of putting it up on there, so that members will be able to see it. So first off, I would. Yeah, sure. But I'd like to finally hand over to Jonathan to present the actual report.
Thank you, Chair. So we do have two items on the agenda for 359 and 360, which are effectively the same application on two different properties, but we do have to consider them separately. So the first application for 359 Ashley Close, it seeks planning permission for the change of use of amenity land to residential curtilage via the erection of a 1.2 metre high fence. The proposed development would enclose an area of approximately 40 square metres fronting Gardner Avenue and turn it into private amenity space for the residential property. So the application site is in red below, so you've got Gardner Avenue running along the north. So that's an aerial photo. So the property has a small garden to the south and the land to the north is open space which fronts onto Gardner Avenue. So this is the proposed site plan. So the existing layout is on the left, so it's just open space. And the proposed site plan shows a 1.2 metre high fence along the red edged boundary. So the existing elevations shows there's no fence visible in the street scene, and then the elevations below shows a 1.2 metre high weatherboarded fence. So these are some images of the property. It's the property on the right hand side here, which I'm circling with the mouse. So this area is open highways land, which belongs to the council. So if planning permission were to be approved, consent would need to be obtained from the council and potentially the land purchased. So as you can see, it is a wide open verge, which gives character and spaciousness to the area. There's another view looking further down the road, so you can see it is open along that part of the highway. And that's a slightly closer up image showing the back of the highway. So the key considerations in this application include the impact of the proposed change of use and fence on the appearance of the surrounding area. The application has been recommended for refusal because officers consider that the fence would be an uncharacteristic feature and enclosing the area to create a garden would not be characteristic of the area. So there are concerns that the proposal would impact on the established open character of the estate and be contrary to policies in the core strategy and the MPPF. Members may note from the report that 2 previous applications for the same form of development were refused in 2018 and 2024, and they were both refused on the same grounds in terms of the impact on the character and appearance of the area. So the application is recommended for refusal on the basis of harm to the area.
Thanks, Jonathan. Now, before I ask you to put any questions to Jonathan, I'm going to ask John to make his statement. Too many Johns, too many Steves, it just gets me confused. If I think, John, if you just give it to Gary and he can pass it on. Or thanks, John. Okay, John, in line with normal rules, you've got 3 minutes once you start, and you know how to operate the thingy.
Mr. Backer has been trying for 5 years to obtain permission for a small rear garden, increasing his family privacy and reducing antisocial behaviour. Youngsters knocking on and vans parking outside his windows. If approved, he plans to add French doors to give access to the garden, so improving the quality of life for his family. At no time has he applied to buy the land. It would remain in the council ownership. I walked Gardner Avenue and counted 60 properties which had small fenced gardens, as he wants for his family. When the houses were first sold, people started putting up fences without seeking permission, and that was the case for many years. There is record that in nearby Tasman Close, an application for a garden was granted approval. To the left of 359 and 360, the 2 properties have fenced gardens, and around the road to the right, so have the next 3. Almost opposite is a 5-property terrace with gardens, 4 with fences. Important because the planning state to put a garden on 359, when rejected last year, claimed it would create a sense of enclosure and would represent an uncharacteristic and incongruous feature on the south side of Gardner. What's needed is to take a larger view of the street scene, including the north side of Gardner with Tasman Caswell, and on the south, Norton and Ashley. If you stand on the corner of 343, 359 and 360 stand out as the only 2 in view without fenced gardens. 359 on its own did stand out in a semi-block, which is why Mr. Loke has joined with us to make this application blend in with the street scene. Planning have indicated it does make for a less awkward application. There is no footpath on the southern side of Gardner Avenue. Pedestrians use the footpath at the rear. I question who would be harmed or aggrieved with the proposed change to the street scene. Certainly not those on the north side who make for the footpath skirting Giffords when walking to the town centre. As for motorists, it's a tight bend and have enough on their plates without being concerned by the street scene. The wide aspects referred to in their delegated report is the access road to Ashley and a block of 12 garages, not particularly appealing, when planning should have taken a wider view encompassing the properties I've indicated. The area will be improved with these 2 applications. This meets with the requirements of the policies. The fence height has been reduced to 1.2, and I note that 363 at right angles to 359 has an extension, you saw that brings it to the northern elevation of 359, and has no windows, so no impact not impacted by the gardens, which will be in sympathy with the wider scene with gardens and positively not uncharacteristic or incongruous. The immediate open aspect behind 359360 was not conducive with trouble-free living for Mr. Backer and his family. We have addressed material planning reasons for the previous refusals. The corporate plan focuses on how we can best serve the people to ensure that residents are enabled and supported to shape their local area. We have an opportunity to make that an enabling change. I urge you to take it.
Thank you, John. Right, any questions for this John? Not that John. Gary.
Can you show us the pic of the house?
Just have 1 second while they get control back of it. Thank you. That's the this application property is the one on the right-hand side. That's 360.
I think I'm speaking. Let him carry on then.
Okay, gentlemen, we really don't. We're just trying to get to the bottom of a planning situation. Gary, if you've got a question, you know, it'll be.
Right. You've moved it again, different. See the one with the red car? Next to that, you've got 6-foot fences. That's 341, 342, 343 to the right. To the left, you've got the same. So how would that be uncharacteristic? It is probably uncharacteristic not to have gardens at the front. So has anybody actually been to visit? Because that makes it odd rather than uncharacteristic. So, and I'll be all for it. I wouldn't be for it if they're going to nick land and not buy it. But all those others, if it's not right for them, then surely 341, 342, 343 have got to take down theirs, same as the other side, because they couldn't have had planning permission for it. So either you'll accept that, or the whole you've got to take away 60 properties that have got them at the front. You can't have a cake and eat it, can you?
So there are some other properties in the area which have extended their gardens in the past, and historically it looks as though those may have done that without planning permission being required. And looking back at the history for the others, they are sort of exempt by passage of time for any further action. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to take enforcement action against those properties now. If an application came forward for those properties at this point for that development, if it hadn't been done, we would probably take the same view as we would with this one. But I can understand that members have seen other properties with similar fences, but these two properties stand at present without fences, and in an area, this direct area up to the access, there are no properties with fences on this particular area.
So basically what
Sure.
you're saying, if a resident nicks land, it's okay, but if somebody goes for actual planning permission and asks permission, then they're refused it. So you're actually encouraging people to steal council land on you. Because
No, we're not.
that, if you've either got to take away the 3 that are there, or you've got to give them permission. There's no other way around it. You can't let some 60 houses steal land, and then the people who do it by the book tell them no. I mean, what message are we sending out to people? Steal land.
As I said, there may be some developments that have taken place over time without planning permission being sought, and those appear to be out of time for enforcement action. So it's unfortunate if development takes place that we're not aware of, and then after that period of time we can't control it. But where there is a development that needs permission, it follows that assessment with the core strategy, and we officers had concerns about this application, but yes, certainly there are some that over time may have done something similar.
Thanks, Gary. Steve and then Jackie.
Thanks, Chair. Can we give any weight to the antisocial behaviour that our speaker mentioned?
It's not usually something that would be a material consideration in terms of planning permission for development of this type, and it would be difficult to just use that as a reason solely to justify the fencing and the garden.
Because you can imagine sort of people walking up right to the, you know, to the window and sort of looking in. It's not ideal, is it?
Thanks, Steve. Jackie?
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to really regret asking this question. Can you get your mouse and can you go round that house and show me where they want that fence? Because for the love of me, I can't see how that's not going to look an eyesore.
Yeah, so it's approximately,
Yeah.
it's going to follow approximately that line, and it will go up about that high, and then approximately back to the house. So back along the grass, up.
Guys, if I can just ask, Jonathan's trying to answer the question, so.
So yes, approximately that height, coming out to approximately here, back that far, and then back to the middle of the property.
Okay.
And I can show you I'll go back to the site plan. So that's the existing with no fence. So the fence will be about 1.5 meters from the back of the highway.
Right, okay. Yeah, thank you. I can see that now. Thank you.
Sorry, 1.5 meters from the back of the road, not the highway, because
yeah. Okay, thanks, Jonathan. It just, to me, I couldn't imagine a fence there, so I needed you to tell me I'm looking in the right place.
Thanks, Jackie. Gary, you have another question? And can we make sure it's a question rather than a statement, please? Oh, we can do statements, but we'll do them in the debate. This is for the question bit.
But the front garden bit, if you see the picture at the back, they're not gardens, they're just hard standing. So they're actually putting a garden where the people haven't got a garden. They want a garden for their families.
Okay, any other questions? Kathy?
Thank you. Can I just ask, would there be any facility whereby they could actually purchase the land from the council?
That would be a decision for the assets team. We can't get involved in those discussions. We could, or members could potentially grant permission, but if assets didn't want them to take over the land or buy the land, then that would be up to the assets team to decide, yeah.
So would it be possible for us to make a decision contingent on them being allowed to purchase the land?
In terms of a planning application, you can make a decision anyway, so it doesn't have to be contingent on assets. The applicant has served notice on Thurrock Council as the landowner, so they've carried out the correct procedure. They've notified the council that they're making the application. So if you're happy with the decision to approve, or if you're happy to make a decision to approve it, there's nothing to stop you approving it, but it might be that it couldn't be built anyway.
Gary, question?
Yes, question. If they own the land, it won't make any difference to your decision, would it? It would just be they own the land. Yeah.
Any other? Oh, hang on. Julian, you're asking a question.
No, I'm going to bring up a couple of technical points. As you can see, there's some lamp columns in this area, and I think we asked the question as highways engineers, are there statutory utilities in there? If that part of that land involves highway, to actually carry out what they're doing, if you give them permission, they will need to apply to stop up the highway.
What does that mean?
That technically means that they would have to ask for the highway not to be their own property and not be highway anymore. If it's highway, then we have a right of access onto that land. So obviously I don't know where the highway boundary is, but for instance, wherever that boundary is, we would need to remain access to that part of the land unless they stop that up. That means going under the section of the Highways Act to go to Magistrates Court to stop up the land. So But I don't know where the boundary of the highway is, but that's something to potentially, I just thought I'd raise that.
There's also section 247 of the TCPA that they could use as well, so it could go to an inspector. But yeah, same point, essentially.
Presumably they could avoid that just by making the garden a bit shallower.
Yeah, depending on where as I said, where the highway boundary is, but obviously there are lamp columns in there, so the assumption is that part of that verge may well be highway.
I think for reasons of clarity, we're looking at whether it's, I think we should just focus on whether this is permissible or should be permissible and not worry about what assets might think or, you know, what other possible technicalities might get involved. Yeah? Okay, any other questions, or do we move on to debate? Okay, let's do that then. So, who would like to cast the first stone? Gary.
Yeah, I can't support anything that encourages residents to steal land, so I'll go. As I say, it's either one or you've got 60 people that have stolen land and you've got 2 people. Give it to them and make it all the same. That is odd. It's not uncharacteristic. It is an odd one because everyone else has got front gardens.
I think, Gary, if I can make a distinction between 2 points. Yes, I think it is probably relevant. We can't see it on that picture, but if a lot of the other buildings have front gardens, then yes, that does call into question the idea of it being incongruous. That's a relevant point. The fact that those other 60 houses or whatever may have, for one reason or another, been able to put gardens in place is not a reason to agree or disagree with this, except insofar as if everybody else has one, it weakens the argument about incongruence. It's not a case of if this one gets denied, everybody else has to be denied. We are literally looking at this one on its merits. Thanks. So, anything else they'd like to say? Okay. You want to go to the vote? So the recommendation... Where's my... So the recommendation is to refuse for the reasons set out in section 16. And I'll read out the reasons. Bear with me because I think it's important. The proposed change of use and erection of the fence would create a sense of enclosure and would represent an uncharacteristic and incongruous feature in the street scene along the southern side of Gardner Avenue, which in turn would be harmful to the established open character of the estate, contrary to policies PMD2 and CSTP22 of the Core Strategy 2015 and the National Planning Policy Framework 2024. That is the recommendation. Do I have a proposer to refuse? Tom? Seconded, Aaron? All those in favour? In favour of refusing permission. So sorry, we have 2 here. Sorry, Steve, I can't see. No, one hand went down. So the recommendation is to refuse permission. Yeah? So it's a recommendation not to do it. To refuse permission to put the garden. Exactly. Yeah? We have 3. Okay. All those against the recommendation? Okay. And I'm personally abstaining. Oh, Steve?
Abstain.
You too? Okay. Carly, 2 abstentions. I have a casting. Okay. So, in that case, I will go with those people who wish to not go with the recommendation. So they don't want to refuse permission. Does that make sense? On balance, for me...
So the recommendation fails?
Yes. Just to explain, on balance for me, for whatever reason, the fact that from everything I've heard, the majority of those properties do seem to have gardens, I think the incongruity is not as strong a case as is made out here. No. And Ash will now come in.
Okay, Chair, so the recommendation of officers has failed. So that's a recommendation in the report. So that effectively, there's an alternative approach, which is minded to approve. What I would just ask officers, so my colleague John, who's presenting the case, is there any conditions if members are minded to approve the application that we would want to insert? Because if we go do another vote, it'll have to include any of those conditions. So I'll just pass over to my colleague John.
Okay. So in terms of what you've seen on the plans, the application proposes a garden area with a close boarded fence of 1.2 metres in height. We could put conditions on to ensure that the visual appearance of the fence is considered acceptable. We could require details of that. We would put the standard time condition on to say that the work would be commenced within 3 years, and a plan condition to show that the size of the garden so that it wouldn't change in any size. Would there be any other conditions that members would want to apply to those? Those would be the standard conditions.
Gary and then Kathy.
Probably not planning, but I wouldn't want them again. As I've been saying, stealing land. I want them to steal land if give them planning permission, but after that, then I think they should have to buy it. So would that's not planning, though, is it? But
no, we could.
We're not going to give land away, are we? Surely, but all we're doing on this is planning permission, so they can if they. But then does that go somewhere else? We say well, you can't do that because you don't own it.
So in terms of the planning process, we're saying, is the change of use of the land acceptable? Is it acceptable to put up a fence? We're not saying you can do the works because we could put an informative on there if members are concerned to say that they would need to speak to the council's assets team prior to any works commencing.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So this is just planning permission, then someone else is going to say no, hopefully, because you can't. So that's a win-win for everybody, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah. Well, somebody in the assets team may not be able to sell it, so we will put that informative on.
I'm guessing, John, practically the purpose of this is if they have planning permission, it's worth applying to buy it. If they don't, it's not. Steve, and then.
Thanks, Chair. I'm a bit worried that in years to come, you know, the garden becomes overgrown and it would look a real site. Is there anything we can do about that? And my second point is, I do know of someone else who's applied to purchase a very small piece of land, smaller than this, and it was priced at building land. It was £20,000. So I don't think, you know, they'd want to pay that sort of money. But if you can answer the first one, I'll be grateful if there's a solution to that.
So there's no condition we can put on to say that the garden must be maintained in a particular condition. If the land in the future, if the change of use occurred and the land got into a really poor state, there is something called a Section 215 notice, which we could serve if it was in a really poor condition and was seriously affecting visual amenity, but there's no specific condition we could put on there.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Dan in, if I may. Dan has another condition to suggest.
Yes, possibly as a result of it being near to the highway and also just concerns about this would be relevant to visual amenity as well. The committee may want to consider removing all permitted development rights in relation to the garden. That will also avoid the other issue of something like a large shed being put up and that blocking highway site or anything like that. It's a very standard condition. So I think it would meet the relevant tests, but obviously the committee may want to consider that. And actually, just to pick up on the point that was just said, also because it's quite close to the highway, there may also be Highways Act powers that your Highways Authority might be able to take in relation to, you know, if there's a massive tree or, you know, stuff sort of spilling out over the edge of it. So that's another control that may be there, which wouldn't be planning, but is another thing available.
Okay, so we have, between John and Dan, we have a number of conditions which we can attach to to an acceptance. Sorry, Kathy, you want to come in?
I think going forward, I wouldn't want really to see like a drop curb and a driveway going onto it. So could we have some condition preventing that, maybe?
Yeah, because of the nature of the road, it would be likely to be a separate planning application for the drop curb anyway. So safeguards exist by virtue of other parts of the Acts. Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. Jackie?
So if, I may have made this up, but if somebody has a piece of council land, for instance, if at the back of my garden, the fence has been extended, not by me, by the people before, and they had no right to do it, and it's been like that for 30, 40 years. I've not bought that part, they've not bought that part, but does that after a certain amount of time become theirs? So for instance, if this chap decides that he doesn't want to buy it and he lives another 100 years, does that become his then or not?
Before I answer this question, does anyone know if this land is registered? So it's not registered with the land registry? Okay. So in the description that you've just given, Councillor, it will depend on if the land's registered with the land registry. If land is not registered with the land registry and is occupied by a person who does not own it for 12 years, they will become the owner, subject to various controls. But that's the normal position. That may be what's happened there. So theoretically, that could arise here. Now, the strong likelihood is it wouldn't, because the council would be aware of this, and if it gives, for example, permission for the person to be on the land, so the council may not sell it to this person, but they may say, we'll permit you to just use it free of charge, or they might charge they might lease it, or they might give a license, a yearly license. That stops you getting what you're describing, which is adverse possession rights. So in theory, yes. In practicality, unless the council forgets that it owns this land for 12 years, and also forgets to permit anything or do anything, and in fact, it's highway land as well, isn't it? So actually, realistically, you can't adversely possess highway land in the same way anyway. So there's various controls, and in fact, Julie may want to come in on that.
Yeah, this is a difficult one because obviously prior to Thurrock being the unitary authority, it was Essex County Council, and we have a lot of instances throughout Thurrock where we have unregistered land which is designated as highway. So Essex at the time never actually registered the land as highway, but it is highway land. And the reason I raised the stopping up issue is because we're dealing with a similar matter at the moment with another a site that actually came in for planning permission.
Reality is, unless something really wrong goes wrong, this isn't going to be adversely possessed.
Okay, folks, I'm conscious that we've got another one coming along, which is effectively the same thing. So I'd like to try and wrap this one and then try and skip through the next one as much as we can, while giving it reasonable due attention. So I think we are suggesting an alternative proposal, which is to grant permission, subject to conditions which have been summarised by Jonathan and by Dan. Do we have a proposer for that? Kathy, thank you. Seconder? Gary? Sorry. Okay, all those in favour? Against? Thank you. So the alternative proposal has been accepted. And I'm guessing that goes back to you then, John, to draw up the appropriate conditions. Will it need to come back to the committee?
Won't need to come back to committee, but we'll clear the wording with you and Councillor Idiot.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So we move on to agenda item 11. As we are aware from what's already been said, we are looking at effectively the same thing, but next door. Jonathan, if you'd like to introduce the report, and councillors, effectively, where you've already heard what you need to know, you don't need to re-ask the questions. Just let us know if there's anything different regarding this proposal. Okay, floor is yours, Jonathan.
Thank you. So this application is at number 360, which is adjacent to the previous site. It also seeks planning permission for the change of use of land, again approximately 40 square metres, to a garden and the erection of a 1.2 metre high fence. There are the existing plans and the proposed plans on the screen now. Officers are concerned that the impact of the proposal would have a detrimental impact on the character and openness of the street scene, and therefore recommending refusal on the basis of the impact on the street scene. Thank you.
Thanks, John. John, you do not have to repeat your statement. You can either just point out that the same points refer to this this application as well, or however you wish to do it. But you don't need to repeat yourself.
Okay, I won't repeat myself. Mr. Loke joined us because, as planning had previously indicated, it was rejected twice before, and that was because it was on its own. And we've spoken with planning, and that's what was in my piece. It is a less awkward, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically, yeah, it's better to be two because it's in keeping with the, I don't want to speak for them. It is better to be two than one. One was maybe out of keeping with everybody else who had gardens. That is the point, especially the immediate ones, the ones to the left, the ones to the, and what I've sort of said is you've got to look at the whole, because this is a very tight bend. 359 and 360 face north. The next ones round on the right face east. That's a very tight bend. The open aspect, you can see from the drawing, is the...
John, apologies, but if it's not in the statement, then we must respectfully ask you not to go off piste. So if the statement still, if the statement as you read it out still refers to or is still applicable to this application, then we just leave it there.
Okay.
Steve.
If there's no questions, Chair, can we go straight to debate and proposal?
Well, 2 seconds, Steve. I think... John, did you want to come in on something?
Just one quick point. Councillor Cecil mentioned it's better that the applications come forward together because then one of them wouldn't look odd on its own. Well, I just would say you've got two applications in front of you tonight. They are different plots of land, so we can't, if one of them goes forward with it, the other one doesn't have to. So there's no mechanism within these applications to ensure that they both go forward together. Just wanted to clarify.
Thanks, John. Fair point. Okay. Any questions to John before do you want to ask questions or do you want to? Yep. So Tom, on you go.
Yep, John, thank you. So if obviously we've approved these, could you now start receiving applications around this particular area under previous similar decisions, and would that change your opinion? So let's just say there was another block next door, they come to you in a month's time, previous similar decisions, what would your thought process be there? Would you be mindful to support that or not really, it would still be a rejection? Thank you.
We would have to take a view on recent decisions in the area, and if these two are both approved tonight, then those would be the most recent decisions on plots in the area. In making any further recommendation, we'd have to consider how similar those sites were. So if they were similar sites, then these are similar decisions.
Thanks, Tom. Gary?
In the picture, I guess we can't do anything about the bodge-up wall at the side of that. That's more unsightly than actually putting a garden up. Is that something that comes under planning? That, whatever that is it's definitely out of character. Would that something, can you just do that, or does that need planning permission?
You wouldn't usually need permission to paint a non-listed building that's not in the conservation area, no.
That's one we just had to live with, Gary. Steve, you got a question?
Yeah, am I right in saying that because we think it's council land, that they will need to get a lease agreement with the council?
I don't know. Well, they could potentially, it could be a lease. They may look to purchase it, but again, it's not really something we can consider under the planning. Yeah, we can, with the previous one, we can put the informative on saying they need to speak to the lands assets team, but we can't sort of control how eventually it's either purchased or leased.
And as I understand it, really, this is a first step. That would be a second step, depending on this decision.
Yeah.
Thanks. Anybody else? Yeah, okay, we've been there, done it. So, does anybody want to add anything by way of debate, or should we go straight to Tom? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the only thing I would say is, look, as a general rule, I don't particularly like these particular fences. They shouldn't be there. I do sympathise with the residents because of what's happened over the road. So in that sense, I understand why we would approve these, but I think we need to be slightly careful going forward. I don't think we'd want to start seeing these all over Thurrock, but I do see substance in allowing this particular street because ultimately, yeah, it's probably not too damaging. So yeah, just I be slightly careful, and I don't know how far previous similar decisions reach out. You know, what happens if it's 2 streets down, 3 streets down? What happens if it's in another part of Thurrock? But yeah, I'm against it, but I understand why members would go for it. I just need to be slightly careful with it because they are unsightly and shouldn't really be there. But that was all I was going to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I do believe one of the conditions we agreed was that the appearance of the fencing should not be unsightly. Was that? I can't remember the exact term.
We put a condition on to request details of what the fence would look like, so either materials or samples, yeah.
So we have some control over that. Sorry, Ash has just reminded me, I'm sure you know anyway, but if the owners of these 2 properties are not able to buy the land, then the permission will lapse after 3 years anyway. So, you know, we may be talking about something that doesn't actually happen. Jackie.
Sorry, more stupidity from me, I'm afraid. For instance, if this chap decided to have an event in that garden, as small as it is, would he need a licence? Because it's council land, isn't it? Or is that really stupid?
If it was just using the garden like you would a normal garden, if it was in the back of a property in a normal layout, he wouldn't need permission. If it was like a formal event, if it was his own garden, again, yeah, I can't see he'd need a licence.
But it sounds like it depends on the event rather than the site.
It is quite a small area as well, so it's, yeah.
As Steve has just pointed out, if it were a public event, so as I say, we're talking about the nature of the event would dictate whether it needed to be licensed, not where you have it. Yeah. Okay.
I was just going to say, Councillor, that's probably controlled by the use. So, you know, if they're starting to do things like that, which would call on that kind of licensing, it may well be that what they're actually doing is no longer simply a residential use in the curtilage. So that would also be controlled in that way as well. I mean, it may come to the same point, but there are various controls, yeah.
And it's definitely not a stupid question. You never know what could happen. No. Exactly. Okay, folks, I'm going to make the assumption, I'm so boring I'm turning myself off. I'm going to make the assumption that we don't want to repeat the previous debate. Would that be correct? So should we go to the vote? Right. So the recommendation is once again to refuse for the reasons set out in section 6, for the reasons that the proposed change of use and erection of the fence would create a sense of enclosure and would represent an uncharacteristic and incongruous feature in the street scene along the southern side of Gardner Avenue, which would be harmful to the established open character of the estate, contrary to policies PMD2 and CST P22 of the Core Strategy 2015 and the National Planning Policy Framework 2024. So, do I have a proposer to reject? Seconder? So proposed, Tom, seconded, Erin. All those in favour of rejecting? Right. It's going to be casting vote again.
No.
All the people that said they didn't like it put their hands up to reject the officer's proposal.
Yeah, okay. The proposal is to refuse permission. Right. Ash thinks I've got it wrong, so I'm going to let him talk.
I think you've got it right, Chair. So the vote. So what I think's happened here, and I think I suggest we re-vote. So what's been voted on there is the recommendation within the report. Okay. Yes, which is what Chair articulated. But I'm not sure. I may be wrong. And I think we'll need to rerun the vote now that was in the committee report on that basis. I'm not sure members actually realised that was what they were voting for. If they did, that's fine. Okay.
Shall we? You're voting to refuse. The proposal is to refuse. I think we know that.
Okay, right, okay.
Right. So, the recommendation is to refuse permission. Proposed, seconded, all those in favour? Which is consistent, it's the same three. Okay, all those against? So the recommendation falls. I would assume that we are now going to put an alternative proposal, as if from out of nowhere, to to grant permission based on the same conditions that were articulated in item 10.
I think for the purposes of the minutes, we'd need to say what those conditions are. So it's standard time, 3-year commencement, plan numbers, details of materials or samples. Condition 4 would be restriction of PD rights on the land, and the informative saying this is just a planning decision and they would need to speak to the assets team.
I'm sorry, Dan, does that include yours? Yes. So the alternative recommendation is what they said. To grant permission based on those conditions. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, do we have a proposer? I'll propose the damn thing. Gary is seconding? That's all right. No, it's absolutely right. And again, sorry, all those in favour? And all those against? Thank you. Totally consistent, which is no less than I would expect. Thank you, folks. Well, it would look very strange if the numbers were different second time round. Okay, so the application has been accepted, but subject to those conditions. Thank you. So before we go to our final item, I think I need to suspend standing orders. So it's actually 7:57, so a little bit early, but just in case. I would like to move a motion without notice to suspend Council Procedure Rule 11.1 to allow the meeting to continue beyond the 2.5-hour time limit.
Our times on here.
It says 7:57 on here. My clock's wrong. Don't blame me, blame the technology. Anyway, I would like to move a motion. All those agreed? Fantastic. I doubt we will take a great deal longer, but we do need to give this last item full attention and the time. So, thank you. Item 12. This is item 24/01152/4, GC Distribution, Beacon Hill Industrial Estate. And if I could ask Nadia to present the report. No, he's not been ostracised. Aaron will be speaking. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
With you, Nadia.
I was waiting for the councillor to get settled for his benefit before I started the presentation. Thank you. So this is the last item on the agenda for this evening, and it relates to the extension to a B8 storage warehouse at the GC Distribution building at the Beacon Hill Industrial Estate. This is the site location on the east side of Beacon Hill in Purfleet. And I should add, for members' benefit, it's been brought to Planning Committee because the site lays within the Purfleet Regeneration Zone, which was previously a major application scheme considered by committee. So, for members' benefit, this is the application site. As you can see, it does fall within Beacon Hill, the industrial estate, but can I ask members to look at page 98 of your agenda, because there'll be a plan I'll be talking to, and it's helpful if members are looking at that plan at the same time as the presentation. So the site, as I say, is within both the industrial estate in Beacon Hill and the wider Purfleet Regeneration Zone, which is shown in the map, the coloured zoned map on page 98 at the top of the page. As you can see in the aerial image, the site, and on that plan within the agenda, the site falls within the yellow zoned area, which was for film and television uses, associated with the 2019 consent for the Purfleet Regeneration Zone. As members will likely be aware, that consent was granted by committee in phased zones, and so far to date, only subzone 1A relating to housing, which is much further west of the site, has been carried out and constructed. At present, there is no indication as to when the film and TV uses might come forward, which falls within Zone 3. Officers have looked at the application in detail, and I must add that the applicant owns the land within which the application site is submitted, and there is no indication yet that there is any compulsory purchase order requested of the land in relation to the Purfleet Regeneration Zone, and indeed the application falls to be determined in association with local and national planning policies, which also give support to economic development in the area. We've also reached out to the Strategic Growth Partnerships and Special Projects team at the authority here, who have provided in 13.6.4 on the same page 98, the fact that the council wishes to regenerate the area is not in itself a reason to withhold consent, but the team will leave planning committee members to determine the application in its own right. So there's no reason for planning committee or indeed for officers to not determine the application in accordance with policy, and irrespective of what may come in the future regarding the Purfleet Regeneration Zone. Still looking at this same aerial image, you'll see that the site is abutted to a local wildlife site and triple SI. So a very slim portion of the eastern part of the site falls within this triple SI. Now, within such areas, any development should not have any adverse impact upon any habitat, and in this case, any invertebrates or anything like that. Now, this site area itself, that does fall within the triple SI, does not comprise of any vegetative land at all, and in fact is unsealed surfaced area, and there are no invertebrates there, and indeed there's no harm considered to any existing habitat of the triple SI. I wanted to flag that up to members at this stage now. So if I just carry on and look at detail of the proposal. So again, this is the site area, and it is that narrow strip along the easternmost boundary of the site that falls within the SSSI, as you'll see in photos later on as well. The site area comprises of several warehouse buildings, and the proposal seeks a rear extension to the existing building at the site. The extension will be 6.5 metres in depth by 39 metres in overall length and would provide around 250 square metres. So it's a relatively modest extension to the existing B8 warehouse use. Here's the proposed site plan showing where the extension would take place. There are no proposed changes to the access arrangements, and the internal yard area would broadly remain as in its current use, with some additional parking that would also fall within, would actually exceed slightly the parking requirements under PMD 8. These are the existing floor plans. So this area here where my cursor is the area where the proposed extension would take place to the eastern strip of the site. I've rotated the image for just the benefit of being able to read it more clearly. And it's existing elevations of the warehouse building. As you can see, it's a very typically designed structure. That's the north elevation. And that's the south elevation. And the east elevation as existing. And finally, one from the west. These are the proposed floor plans showing the narrow rear extension towards the rear of the site, following the same overall design approach as the existing warehouse building. And here's the proposed elevation looking north with the extension shown on the left-hand side of the drawing there. As you see, it matches the ridge height and overall form of the main building. At a south elevation of the proposal showing the extension on the right-hand side of the image there. And ones from the side showing the dual pitch roof of the proposal. Some site photos for members who may not be familiar. So this is looking north up Beacon Hill with the application site broadly shown in wide context on the right with the existing buildings of the SSSI to the immediate east of the site. And some site photos looking within the yard towards the main building. And this is the area to the immediate rear of the building showing its use at the moment. There's a little bit of informal storage and some plant vehicle movements as they're shifting materials, and the applicant's looking to utilise that area more effectively within the application. So overall, as I've previously highlighted, the site is within a primary industrial commercial area and is acceptable in principle, so there are no concerns regarding the use. It does lie within the perfect regeneration zone, but there's no justifiable planning reason to withhold determining the application. The proposal falls slightly within the borders of the adjacent SSSI, but would have no detrimental impact upon any habitat there. The scale and design of the proposed extension would have no adverse impacts upon the appearance of the site, and there'd be no changes to the access, and highway and parking impacts would be acceptable and comply with policy in every respect. The scheme would be acceptable regarding other matters relating to amenity, flooding and B&G, and is recommended to members for approval. Happy to take any questions if anyone has any. Thanks.
Thanks, Nadia. Before we go to questions, I'd just like to give Aaron the chance to speak as ward member in opposition to this application.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, committee. So this evening I'd like to object to the application in front of us. The land this development is proposed is in the zone of the highly anticipated Purfleet regeneration site. The regeneration hasn't gone away and is being worked through as we speak to find a new partner to deliver the next phases. On every resident's mind is the regeneration to rejuvenate their local area and finally give the area its most needed infrastructure. With this in mind, I ask the committee to reject this application on the ground of its earmarked for the regeneration. But with your indulgence, Chair, listening to Nadia, she's right. There is no planning objections to this application, and we may have to accept it, but I do want to keep on every member's mind that this is in the regeneration zone. So being fair, that's my statement.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay. Questions for Nadia? Steve? Thanks.
Sorry, Nadia, I've been sitting here sort of half scratching my head, and I've been through this loop in the past, but what we haven't got is that, well, you had it on one thing, a north, south, west, east, because I'm looking at the maps in here, and I am struggling to unravel where north is.
Through you, Chair, I'll just go back through the presentation. Just let me, there we are. Okay, so here's the location plan. Yeah, location plan, and the north is, okay, so the top right-hand corner of the application site there, which we go to the aerial image there, it's the uppermost right-hand corner of the site as it abuts that immediate portion of the triple SI. Yes, it is, yeah. Absolutely. In fairness, Chair, I orientated the location plans to better show where the extension was, and perhaps I could have been clearer on that, so apologies if I caused any confusion. Yeah. No?
Thanks, Steve. Linda, then Gary. Then Jackie.
Thanks, Chair. If this plan was approved, would it have any impact on the regeneration? So if somebody was to come along for the film and the TV, I assume that there'd be a purchase order, or whatever happens, it wouldn't stop any of that, would it?
Through you, Chair, that's correct. We have a live consent at the moment, but obviously there would be other steps that any partner or whoever would want to bring forward that perfect regeneration zone would need to go through. In particular, this would relate to land purchasing and discussions with owners. At present, the applicant is the landowner of this site. So if the scheme came along, the regen scheme came along tomorrow, the same process would need to be gone through as of now, prior to this application coming in, as would happen within the next 3 years if this application is approved and implemented. The same steps would need to be carried out.
Thanks, Linda. Was it Gary next?
Yes, just things for adding weight. Is there an argument that business growth is effectively regeneration anyway? And can we put any weight on something that's proposed? It's the perfectly whatever, but it's just a proposal. It might never happen. So there is absolutely no weight we can put on that, I guess.
Through you, Chair. So in the report on that same page 98, in paragraph 13.6.3, we do identify that the current scheme has weight with respect to economic development. It's an appropriate use in an employment generating area. We should be encouraging this kind of development. With respect to, I think, what the council was inferring in terms of any weight given to the perfect regeneration zone, and that growth, obviously, long-term, the council would like to encourage that. We've given consent to that before. There is nothing to stop that coming forward, separate to conversations with the relevant landowners. And weight was given to that during those previous applications. And we might see similar small-scale applications like this come forward whilst things take their course in terms of future proposals in relation to the regeneration zone.
Thanks, Gary. Jackie?
Thanks, Chair. Nadia, you said it falls slightly within the borders of the adjacent SSSI, but doesn't impact. What is your version of slightly?
Through you, Chair. Carly, if I might get the presentation back up again. In answer to the councillor's question, it's probably easier if I show on the location plan rather than trying to zoom in on an aerial here. But I think it's fair to say, looking at the aerial image, you can see it's the area from the rear of the existing warehouse to the extent of their land ownership of the site, which happens to cut into that triple SI. Now, if I scroll down here, there is this is probably the better image to show. There is a distance of that is minimal, is 7.5 metres from the existing rear of the warehouse to that boundary. Now, the triple SI falls within that. It's quite difficult to tell from the local plan proposals map exactly where that boundary is. And if we look down at the images of the site, which show the start of that boundary here, I can imagine with the land level differences, that might have slightly, the measurement of that exact point may have slightly been, the width of a line on a plan could actually impact upon exactly where that boundary is. But I think it would be fair to say it would fall partially within the rear of the site to the actual edge of that vegetation there. I would say it's probably closer to the vegetation than the rear of the site, but we're talking part way through. And within the submission documents within the application, there are clear lines that show that. The extension would be built on that area, but as I say, it's clear from the evidence on site and from the advice from the landscape and ecology advisor that there is no habitat that could be created within that area, even if all of that is within the triple SI. And indeed, it's not going to be harmful to any existing habitat or invertebrates there, because there are none there at the moment, and it's not habitat that could be occupied by invertebrates. I hope that helps, Chair.
Kathy.
Just to follow up on Jackie's point, would any of the vegetation need to be cleared, or would that remain the existing vegetation?
Yeah, through you, Chair, all of the extension would be within that site, and the vegetation wouldn't be touched at all. It's purely that area you can see in those images. It doesn't go beyond the extent of that very rough, loose, hard surfacing on the site. Because that area, as I say, measures 7.5 at its narrowest, and the extension 6.5 in width.
Can I just come? So in the building process, they wouldn't be looking to clear the vegetation to allow the building process, anything like that?
Through you, Chair, we wouldn't be expecting that. There is a SEMP condition included, so we could always look at that in detail when considering it. And indeed, there are, in addition to the SEMP conditions, there are very detailed landscape conditions and biodiversity conditions on page 105 and 106 that ask a lot of the applicant in terms of biodiversity and landscaping. Yeah. So hopefully that gives the committee some comfort in that regard.
Thanks, Kathy. Any other questions? Okay, so I suggest we move on to debate. So any thoughts, please, on what you've heard? Kathy.
As Aaron sort of touched on there, I can't see it does really affect the Perfectly on Thames regeneration, as if that does come back in its previous form, then it wouldn't prevent it, would it? So I can't see that as a reason for refusing it. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Sisterson. I can't see that there's a reason. I mean, the landowner will know about the regeneration and, you know, any that he'll have to give the land up. So, yeah, and as you say, there's none of the vegetation will be going. So I can't see any reason not to.
Gary?
Yeah, agreeing with everybody and say the growth of the business, we've got to say that's great. Well, that's what we want to see, isn't it? Business is growing, business is getting bigger, and it's not going to affect anything. He owns the land, so I can't see any issues with that at all.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, Steve?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it looks to me as though it's just sort of changing an outdoor storage area for an indoor storage area, so not affecting anybody at all. So, yeah, more than happy to agree with that one.
Thanks, Steve. So, okay, before we go to the vote, I think it seems clear that whilst on the one hand it's right that we should bear in mind the planned or proposed, however you want to say it, regeneration area in considering applications like this. It does feel like that. It does feel that we're sort of agreed that this particular development, the amount of extra space that it's going to occupy, is of minimal impact on the wider regeneration area. So it shouldn't be taken as any kind of free rein. But on this, we're asked to judge each application on its own merits, and this one on its own merits, and particularly looking at that, looking at those pictures, looking at where it's going to go. I can't really feel that it's going to be doing any damage, whilst on the other hand, it is, as it says in here, going to safeguard some jobs, which is always a good thing. So yeah, I suggest we go to the vote. I think it feels like the appropriate moment. So the recommendation this time is to approve. So the recommendation is to say yes. I would like a proposer, Gary, and a seconder, Steve. So all those in favour? Okay. Against? Actually, I would like to say that in making your submission, Aaron, you were commendably honest there, and it does help when the people making their statements are minded to see both sides of the picture, so thank you. Okay, folks, so that last item is approved. Before we finish, I feel like the priest at the pulpit, the parish notices. Before we finish, I'd like to remind members that we have Greenbelt training booked for Tuesday at 6, next Tuesday at 6. So when I say remind, I think, is that an in-person?
In person or online.
So it's a hybrid. Yeah. Okay. I've switched myself off again. It's getting to be a habit. So I'd like to thank everybody for their time and attention to these items. As usual, we've had some good discussion, and I believe we will be meeting again in May to further reduce the backlog that would have happened otherwise. I think we're going to be looking at 11 items in May, so tonight's been useful from that point of view. So have a good rest of your week. Thank you very much, and thank you, officers, for your presentations. They're ignoring me already, look.
Well done, Chair.